I'm here with Mickey Hebel. She's the Martha and Henry Malcolm Lovett Professor of Psychology and Management at Rice University. And she's here as part of the Women at Work Gender Initiative Conference at INSEAD. Thank you for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
One really interesting area of your study has to do with biases as they reflect themselves in recommendation letters and mentoring in other professional areas. What have you learned?
So when we look at letters of recommendations, and these are actual letters of recommendations for positions, we see that letters of recommendations written for men are longer. They contain more agentic words, words that are independent, initiative, assertive, and they have fewer words that are communal words, caring, sensitive, kind. These words make a difference. So we know that the more caring words in letters of recommendations are related to more negative quality letters. So people judge them more negatively to the extent that they have these caring words in them. In additional research, what we found is that in letters of recommendations, there are more doubt raisers that are written for women than for men. Doubt raisers are words that introduce doubt, right? So we say, this woman has the potential to be good, whereas this man is good.
On a related point, you recently studied the issue of male allies and how they can be effective in promoting women. What have you learned about that?
We found some fascinating results in our studies, and that is that women were not effective at persuading men when it came to gender-related issues. We call it the Peanuts effect, the cartoon, and that is when men hear women talking about gender issues, what they really hear is wah, 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 wah. And so what we found is if we really want to influence men, what we need to do is engage men in talking about gender-related issues. So male allies, not surprisingly, they're the power holders of society. We need to include them and we need to make sure we're utilizing them.
You've talked about interpersonal discrimination as being something subtle but very important in shaping people's lives and outcomes. What is it about that that's so important?
Yeah, so when we think about discrimination now, I think we can easily put discrimination into just two easy piles. One is the overt discrimination. I don't like you because you're a woman. I can't believe that we're going to hire another woman. Oh, it's a woman again. So it's this very overt, I know you don't like me because I'm a woman. To some extent, we're used to that. We know what to do with that. It's called sexism. It's a problem outside of me. It's really about you. When we deal with interpersonal discrimination, we deal with an entirely different entity. It's you maybe engaging in behaviors that aren't certain for me that it's discrimination. So maybe you don't smile at me as much. Maybe you turn your body position away from me. Maybe you try to cut me off. We call it things like incivilities or microtransgressions. And the reason that these are more problematic is they leave me wondering, is it you? Are you a jerk? Is there something you don't like about me? Is this me? Is this because I'm a woman? And to the extent that people are engaged in that metacognitive activity, our research shows that it decreases their performance. So it's actually problematic. It's more problematic. I also tell people from the victim, from the women's side, if you are experiencing what you think may be subtle discrimination, what I say is, let's just make it into overt. Let's pretend, let's label it overt discrimination and move on. And here's why. Because when we take it outside of ourselves and say we think it's this, we may be wrong, but at least it stops our engine from expending energy toward it, and we can move on and do good performance.
What about those who may be privy to interpersonal discrimination but not necessarily committing it themselves?
In our own research, what we see is that if an ally speaks up and condones or condemns discrimination, it has an impact on another individual, okay, on the participants of research who are the naive participants. It does have an impact. It spreads over, and they do adopt that condemning or condoning. What's important is even when we do that and see it short term, when we look at a follow-up and see does that one interaction with an ally have a long-term effect, we find it does indeed. So you can be influenced from an ally standing up and condemning discrimination, not only in the short term, but also 6 months later.
And another recent study of yours covers speakers at academic colloquia.
Yes.
And you discovered some very glaring disparities there.
Yes, I was sitting at a colloquium talk at my university, and I realized in a puzzled way that it was the fourth or fifth man that I had seen give a talk. And I'm not a counter, I'm not a bean counter, but I thought, well, this is really interesting. And I started thinking back and thinking about how many men we had had, and I decided, I wonder if this is something that's a more global pattern, and it's a type of this sort of interpersonal discrimination, this sort of subtle type of bias, that people are doing this, but they're not even aware of it. So what I did is I counted, we had a number of graduate students go back and count the number of speakers who were giving talks at the top 50 universities in the country, and they found that there was a very large difference between the number of men and women giving talks. There was about 65% men and 35% women. And of course, you could say, well, maybe that's not the end of the story, because maybe more men are professors, maybe more men are higher in the ranks, maybe more men are invited to give the talks. And so we went back and we coded for the availability of the pool. We looked at where they were in the ranks. We controlled for a number of factors, and we still saw that men were being invited to give talks more often than women were. The very last thing we wanted to do was say, who's making these decisions? Does that matter? And some of the decisions for colloquium speakers are made by individuals, and some are made by committees. What we found was that when it was an individual and it was a female, they were 2/3 more likely to invite women than men were. When we looked at the committee, we also saw that the increase of women on the committee was marginally related to more women giving talks. So we kind of have a nice story here of this is another type of subtle disadvantage that we see. People aren't doing it necessarily intentionally, but we need to become aware of it, and we need to see, well, here's one of the ways that we can reduce it, is to have women be on the colloquium committees.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.